Hello, Tom Simmons here with another installment of Economics with Tully, and today, as part of the Sports Economics lecture series, we're going to be looking very briefly at the league structure of the NBA, the National Basketball Association, which in many ways is one of the most complicated and convoluted histories and league structures of any of the five big professional sports leagues. The NBA actually got its start in 1946, and you might think that it was, like many other leagues, was actually begun by the sport that the league is revolving around, basketball. It was not. It was actually formed by the owners of ice hockey arenas, who were looking for an alternative activity, alternative events to have in the arenas when the hockey teams weren't playing. That was 1946. By the time 1954 rolled around, it turns out that wasn't such a hot idea at all, because there was a series of contractions, and there were only 8 teams remaining in this new NBA that was created. From that time forward, they began to grow very slowly, but by the end of the 1970s, TV coverage and viewership was down. Gate receipts and attendance at actual games were down. And there was a lot of talk as to whether or not basketball would actually survive as a professional sport in the United States. Then at the very end of the 70s, right around the time that I'm entering and going to college, you had a trio of players who reignited the public's interest in basketball and transformed the game. And that would be Larry Bird in the Boston Celtics, Magic Johnson in the LA Lakers, and Michael Jordan in the Chicago Bulls. And these players just captured public imagination, especially urban youth, and the game began to take off again. And right around the same time as all of this, 1984, a new commissioner of the NBA was named, and that was David Stern. David Stern is probably one of the single most controversial figures in league sports that has ever existed. And he took a sport that was struggling, that was largely run by individual teams, individual owners, who squabbled amongst themselves, and he became a very, very strong commissioner from 1984 right up until his retirement/resignation as recently as the beginning of 2014. And during his tenure, the face of basketball changed big time, for good or for bad, and much of what he did was controversial, and much of what he did put him in direct, headbutting with both the owners who put him there and the players. It was not an easy tenure for Stern. There's a lot of things he did that sports writers and owners and players still complain about. What can't be challenged is the fact that under him, basketball went from what was almost a dying sport to a sport that is now an international sport that has the highest paid players of any sport in the world, even including all the different football and soccer teams and cricket teams and any other professional sport leagues you want to look at. The NBA is number one in terms of player salaries, and has been internationalized. So from this very humble beginning in Springfield, Massachusetts, where people are throwing balls into a apple basket hung up on a pole, you now have an international sport. I think it's important to just look really quickly at the controversies and the changes that took place while David Stern was the commissioner of the NBA. Because as you know, we're going through this series very specifically to look at the league structure. Who's in control? Is it the owners who hire a commissioner to do their bidding for them, like a producer cooperative? Is it a shared relationship, like a standard franchise, or is it more like a corporate chain where people at the top are basically telling the owners, "Here's what you do and here's how you do it," and they hire and fire at will? It's really hard to tell with basketball because its history and the relationships are so complicated and so convoluted. Stern becomes commissioner in 1984. By 1985, he's already got his first big scandal on his hands, which he himself is a part of. Unlike other sports, which have a very easily understandable reverse draft, the lowest placing team in the league gets first shot at new players for the next season. The NBA doesn't have that strict reverse draft system. Instead, what happens is the last 7 teams in the league go into a drawing, completely by chance, and then the commissioner draws out the names, and whoever's name he draws out of those last 7 gets their first shot. Well, 1 year after becoming commissioner, the New York Knicks, who were his personal favorite, and that was never up for debate, was one of the lowest 7 teams. And when they put envelopes into this big barrel in order to let him choose which team would get the first draft pick, the envelope for the New York Knicks was shoved into the barrel and bent, while all the others were gently placed in. And when Stern pulled out the very first envelope, which one did he pull out? The one that was bent. It was the kind of thing, and of course no one ever knows, was this done on purpose, or is this real scandal, or is this just people looking for stuff? It'll never be known. But it's the kind of thing that would plague both the good things he did and exacerbate the bad things that he did while he was commissioner. The league, of course, grew. It's no longer 8 teams. It's now up to 30. He saw more, and he oversaw more moves of teams than in any other league sport in history. At least 6 teams relocated under his commissionership, including the Seattle Supersonics, which moved from Seattle, which is a fairly decent media market when you think about it. They've got a soccer team, they've got a football team. They moved to Oklahoma City, which left a lot of people scratching their heads. What kind of media market is in Oklahoma City? Well, not much of one. In fact, it's the 45th largest in the country, which is not very large. Other owners tried to stop it. People in Washington State tried to stop it. Stern supported this one owner, a new owner who bought the Supersonics, in moving that team. And in doing so, he incurred the wrath and ill will of some of the other owners who are saying, well, what is this? You're letting people move into little tiny towns that have no revenue coming in. How are we supposed to support them? How are they supposed to stay alive? And in fact, the NBA has more teams in small cities than, once again, any other league. You've got NBA teams in Charlotte, North Carolina, Memphis, Tennessee, Oklahoma City, Salt Lake City, Sacramento, California. These are not big markets. These are not markets that are going to sell millions and millions of dollars worth of broadcast rights locally. And there's got to be a way to make sure they have enough revenue coming in to actually survive. And the more small teams you have, or the more teams you have in small locations, I should say, the more the larger teams begin to worry, hey, what are we going to become the sugar daddies for all of these other small teams? And that was an issue that would grow over Stern's commissionership in the NBA. There was a controversy over a change in the ball that was used. They changed from leather basketballs to microfiber balls, and this time the players rose up because they said the microfibers were actually cutting their hands, and they did eventually go back to the leather balls. We had the FBI investigate referees for fixing games and betting on those games and betting on the point spreads. Donald Stern issued, basically on his own, a dress code for NBA players when they represented their team or the league or out in public doing charity. There's a lot of different aspects of this dress code, but I'm just going to be blunt about it. You couldn't look ghetto. And that's how many of the players took it. Many of the players took it as a slap against black urban culture. That they weren't allowed to wear chains or hats backwards or have too much jewelry, and they weren't allowed to look like the culture that many of them represented. And if you remember, one of the very first things we covered in this class was how sports teams represent a place and a people. And that's part of the product they're selling. Well, Stern didn't like that. He did not like that representation and that image, and it drew the wrath of sports writers and of many of the players themselves. He, again by himself, instituted a rule that any player who leaves the bench during a fight is suspended, even if they're not involved in a fight. And there have been instances where he has done that, and coaches and managers on both sides, from both teams, have said, wait, that's wrong. What you've done here is wrong. He has stuck to his guns in keeping to this rule. He vetoed trades between teams that he thought were not in the best interest of the league. He fined the Spurs in 2012, and there's a long-standing belief that Stern did not like the Spurs, that he was a Knicks favorite, or Knicks fan, and that he did not like the Spurs. And he fined them $250,000 in one game in 2012 because he thought they didn't put their best players on the court. And by doing that he took that as a personal affront, that they were trying to embarrass him. Again, a very controversial, a very heavy-handed decision. A lot of sports writers, a lot of journalists, a lot of other owners began to say Stern is a problem. He has taken too much control, has too much personal say-so over what's going on. And in fact, in one interview, he very flippantly was crowing about how proud he was that he had so much control in the NBA because he, quote, knew where the bodies were buried because I buried them. It was a really improper thing to say because people finally said, we're not happy with Stern. He needs to go. And the handwriting was pretty much on the wall by the time that the most famous and most recent scandal erupted in the NBA, and that was Donald Sterling's racist comments and the efforts to get rid of him as the owner of the LA Clippers. And that was Stern's last hurrah, was that effort to do that. And of course that was not easy because, as I've said, everything about the NBA is convoluted. The commissioner was never meant to have that much power and authority. Stern took it, and he used it. And he used it for 30 years, 84 to 2014. The owners of the teams in the NBA are called members of the association. And even though they are members, they don't have their own say. They appoint someone to speak on their behalf on what's called the Board of Governors. And those Board of Governors then select the commissioner. So you've got a little bit of an insulating body in between the owners on the one hand and the commissioner on the other, which is probably what enabled Stern to be a little more heavy-handed than the owners originally expected he would be. Of course, by being heavy-handed and very driven, he also took basketball from a place of being just about to fail into this international sport. So, one of the last things he did outside of the dealing with the Sterling scandal was implement the league's first serious revenue sharing program. The NBA has always taken all of the money it receives for national broadcasting and distributed it equally across all of the teams. And I think last year that came to about $30 million per team. That was the only revenue sharing they really were involved in. But because Stern did so many things that upset players, the off-the-bench rule, the no ghetto clothing rule, switching the ball on them, things like that, the players' union in basketball has become very, very strong, very powerful, very quick to speak with one voice when necessary, and so they have a lot more to say about what is going on within their league than just the owners and the commissioner. They have of the five sports probably the strongest union. Having said that, the revenue sharing agreement that Stern came up with, the most complicated, of course, in all the sports. And it's not something I'm going to go through step by step in this video because I'm actually posting the process and an article about the process on our learning platform, and I'll have you do an exercise on it. But in brief, basically, the teams are taking their revenue, they're subtracting out whatever they need to pay for their stadiums, they're giving 50% to the league, but then they're getting back the average, an amount equal to the average salary of every team in the league. And if it sounds complicated, it is. But it means that a high revenue team with high salaries is affected differently than a high revenue team with low salaries, which is affected differently than a low revenue team with high salaries or a low revenue team with low salaries. So everyone is affected a little bit differently, and it was a system that I say Stern implemented it. They actually brought together 13 owners and said, you guys are the planning committee, you figure this out. And the owners, representing both large and small city teams, are the ones who actually worked this out, and Stern said, yes, this is what we'll do. And that was implemented, and the 2014 year is the first year it's actually been in use. So this is brand new stuff. Now, having gone all through that, I mentioned that basketball players, NBA basketball players, are the highest average paid professional sports players in the world. More football, more than soccer, anywhere around the world, doesn't matter. They're number one. Part of that is, again, that strong union that they have needed to develop because of so much controversy that was affecting them and their belief that they needed to speak and have a voice, especially when you consider that players in basketball are often seen as kind of outsiders to the big money who actually own them. Now they're making the big money. And this is a good time to bring up the question of, do these players make too much? What is the justification for the kinds of salaries that professional sports players are making? Well, the concept, the idea, that these players make enormous amount of sums is something economists call the superstar effect. And it's not just sports players who are beneficiaries of the superstar effect. It's also singers and entertainers. It's also the CEOs, the chief executive officers of very large corporations. All of those people, people who are seen as the top manager of an enormous corporation, people who get out there and sing and just no one can do what they do, and sports players, all benefit from this superstar effect. And there are three different justifications that economists have used to explain why this is so. And I suppose from the outset, I should say, well, why are you defending this? Why are you explaining? Well, because economists have it, it's part of our profession. We don't look at how things should be, or how we want them to be, or what we think should be done. We look at how things are. And the way things are is that sports players, like executives and companies, like entertainers, get paid enormously high salaries. And to an economist, if that is the objective reality, that they do get paid these amounts, there must be some economic reason behind it, behind the superstar effect. And that's where we come up with these three different justifications as to what might be going on here. The first justification for these enormous salaries is called a supply of one. A supply of one. So, let me build the rationale here. If you wanted to go out and buy pumpkins for Halloween, and you have a variety of suppliers, of stores to get it from. There's farmers markets and farm stands and supermarkets, and everybody and their brother seems to have pumpkins out on the road. If there's a large supply of pumpkins, then you have the ability to shop around a little bit and go for the lowest price, and many consumers will. And all of those supermarkets and farm stands trying to get rid of pumpkins, to sell pumpkins, are going to have to keep their price relatively low, or they're not going to be able to sell the pumpkins. But what if, instead of selling pumpkins, a store was selling something of which there's only one in the world? Vincent van Gogh's painting, Starry, Starry Night. Something like that there is only one of. And so if many people wish to purchase that one original painting, the person who owns the painting is going to be able to jack that price up really high, because many, many people want what he's got. It's a basic question of supply and demand. There's a supply of one, but demand by many for that good. And so you have an auction, and it sells at a really high price. Well, the supply of one analogy carries over into sports because of the belief that many sports players are in fact a supply of one. There is no other Kobe Bryant. There is no other Larry Bird. There is no other Michael Jordan. There will never be another Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Every one of these players brings something unique. Unique in their background, unique in their talents, unique in their personality, unique in the fan base that they have behind them, so that when teams want them, they're willing to bid up the price in order to get that one player, just like you'd be able to jack up the price to get that one Vincent van Gogh original Starry, Starry Night painting. Someone else is okay. Another painting is nice. Another Van Gogh painting is nice, but it's not the one you wanted. So because of that, there is economic pressure to raise the salaries of these players, because it's a basic function of supply and demand. They are selling themselves They are supplying labor, and everyone wants it. Why shouldn't they go to the highest bidder? Why is that any different than if you owned a painting and sold it to the highest bidder? They own their labor, and they're selling it to the highest bidder. So that's the first justification. The second and third justification use the word marginal. And so before I go into them, we need to explain what an economist means when he or she uses the word marginal, or marginal thinking, or marginal analysis. Let's pretend for a second that you work part-time. Maybe you're going to school, you work 20 hours a week, something like that. You have Saturday off. And your boss comes to you and says, "Hey, I really need someone to work this Saturday. Would you be willing to work? I'll pay you time and a half." Chances are the thought process that you would go through is you would weigh what you had already planned to do on Saturday against the benefits of getting time and a half. Well, I was going to go to Six Flags. I was going to clean the garden. I was going to go out on a date. I was going to do my homework. But time and a half for a Saturday could be really good. Which is more important to me? See, what you don't do is you don't rethink your whole career. Gee, should I be working in this place? What's most important in the grand scheme of things? Making money or being happy? What you do is you engage in marginal thinking. It's natural, it's normal. Economists refer to it all the time. And what I mean by marginal thinking is you weigh the costs versus the benefits of the next step. You don't rethink your career or the place where you're working. You really think about it from this point forward. Okay, if I work this Saturday, I got to give this up, I can do this. You move forward, okay? That's marginal thinking. So, with that understanding, the second justification for these very high salaries is called the marginal revenue product. That's a microeconomic concept, the marginal revenue product. Fancy words, but take them one at a time. Marginal, the next step. Revenue, money coming in. Product, whatever it is we're buying or selling. Marginal revenue product suggests this. If I own a restaurant, and again, I'm going to move away from sports and into some things that you might be a little more familiar with on a daily basis. If I own a restaurant and I decide to hire one more waitstaff or be open one more day, I better be doing that because I think it's going to make me more money. Maybe by opening one more day, okay, that's marginal thinking, one more, I'll be able to make an extra $1,000 this week. Well, if I can do that, then maybe it makes sense to open. But if by opening an extra day, I have to hire additional people and pay them a lot of money, and a lot of people aren't going to come on that day anyway, so they're going to lose money, I'm not going to do it. I want to make sure that the marginal revenue product, the additional money I'm going to take in from doing this, from taking this step, is positive. When a sports team hires a player, they are actually thinking in terms of marginal revenue product. If our team brings on player X, what is that going to do for our team? It might draw some fans. It might get some increased media attention. It might get more advertising on that media station, which enables us to charge them more for broadcast rights. It might fill more seats because he's a really popular player. It might enable us to sell more caps and jackets and jerseys because people want to wear his number. When you add all of that up, Okay? The increased broadcast revenue and broadcast rights and license sales and people buying tickets to the game and buying hot dogs and beer while they're there. If that comes out to, oh, wow, we're going to make another $2.5 million a year by signing player X, that becomes what player X is worth for that year. The marginal revenue product, the amount of additional money you expect to take in as a result of signing this player, is exactly, therefore, what he's worth, because that's what he is bringing into your team. And the economic justification there is, if someone like that is bringing millions of dollars of extra revenue into your team, into the owner's pocket, well, if it's the labor, if it's the player who's actually doing that, then why the heck shouldn't he be getting that money instead of the owner? He's the one who's doing the work. He's the one who's got the fan base. He's the one whose name is emblazoned on the jerseys and the jackets being sold. He's the reason they're coming to the stadium. Most people come to see players and don't even know the owners' names. So marginal revenue product is another way economists have used to justify the increasingly large salaries that sports players get. The third one is called marginal cost. And instead of looking at this from the perspective of how much money is coming into the business, we actually flip it around and say, how much effort does the player have to put forth in order to do what they do? You know, in sports, there's thousands, maybe millions of people who would love to play professional sports. And you know what? They're good. Many of them are very good. But being good doesn't cut it. That's not going to get you on a professional sports team. Being good is not good enough. You've got to be better. You've got to be best. You've got to be top-notch. How many player spots are there on professional sports teams, and how many people want to play on them? I mean, think of that ratio. You have got to be the best. How do you become the best? Well, one way you become the best, and your coaches have told you this from the time you started playing any sport: practice, practice, practice. Commitment. Work at it. Right? Well, you can bet that when someone spends all of their free time shooting baskets, practicing moves, practicing until they get it perfect. Maybe they've got one day off, and their wife wants them to go shopping, and their daughter wants them to take her to a birthday party, and the grass has got to be mowed, and there's all the stuff that's got to be done, and the player's thinking, I really need to get that 3-point shot down perfect because I'm not hitting it. And so what they do is they give up that birthday party. They give up going to the store with the wife. They give up the garden work that's got to be done, or whatever it is that needs to be done. Why? To practice a little more, just to get it right, and to make sure they've got it right. When you're a player and you do this, and you travel, a baseball player will travel to spring training, and then be non-existent for the summer because they've got such a crazy baseball schedule, and a basketball player is traveling across the country constantly to play games. You're giving up a lot. You're giving a lot of your home life and of all the other things you could be doing, and that is a high cost on the person. So the third justification for these high player salaries is, if I'm going to incur such a high personal cost, think of football players and the head injuries, and almost all sports players and the physical toll on their body. If I am going to incur such a high physical cost and give up so much of my life and my family and all these other things I could be doing if I wasn't practicing, if I wasn't working for the team, if I wasn't traveling with the team, it needs to be worth my while. In other words, just like any business person who's selling, doesn't matter what it is, tie-dye shirts, hand-blown glass, beeswax candles, or homemade quilts. If you're going to be in business, you must cover your costs. If you're going to be a player on a sports team, you must cover the personal cost. And the way you do that is by seeking a salary that is very high by most people's standards, but that's because most people are not putting out that effort and are not incurring that kind of cost to live that kind of life. And so that high salary covers the high cost they incur. So those are three approaches economists use to say, well, yeah, there's a superstar effect. And this is why Cher and Beyonce and Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen and Jason Mraz and any other entertainer or performer you can think of gets a really high salary. Superstar effect. And all three of these are reasons. One, they're a supply of one. If you're going to a Tina Turner concert, you don't want Taylor Swift to show up. Two, the marginal revenue product. These people are responsible for bringing millions of dollars into the business, therefore they deserve that money. And three, marginal cost. They are incurring a higher personal cost than anyone else, and in order to continue doing that, they need to cover those personal costs, and they're very high costs. So, that was a really quick overview of the NBA structure. I'll be posting more things online that I'm going to need you to read, as well as, again, because the NBA salaries are so high, just a brief economist's overview as to why those salaries might be justifiable. And very often when you have conversations with your friends about, those sports figure salaries are ridiculous. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Most economists would see some justification in the salaries that they're actually earning, and sometimes would even suggest that the salaries aren't high enough compared to what the owners are making for putting out relatively little effort themselves. So, Tom Simmons, and that was our video on the NBA for Eco 105, and we'll look forward to next time.